10 secondes. Et on est en onde.
Good day and welcome to our online discussion of euthanasia, assisted suicide, and people with disabilities. For the 6th of March 2015. My name is Amy Hasbrook and this is Christian Debray.
Hi.
And we are with Not Dead Yet. Toujours vivant, not dead yet. Toujours vivant, not dead yet. We are a project of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending-of-life practices that have a discriminatory impact on people with disabilities. There are a lot of reasons that we oppose the legalization of assisted suicide, but here are just a few of them. First of all, it's unnecessary because everyone already has the option to refuse on demand. Secondly, because it's discriminatory. Because while people without disabilities receive suicide prevention services if they express a desire to die, people with disabilities will be encouraged and even helped to die. Also, it cannot be free as long as people with disabilities don't have free choice in where and how they live. And that's absolutely true because of lack of community supports and accessible housing. And finally, in the places where assisted suicide is legal, the safeguards have not prevented the deaths of people who should not be killed under those. We have the debate is generally between so-called progressives on the one hand and what's known as the conservatives or religious people on the other hand, and the media does not include people with disabilities in this debate, but our perspective is very important and unique and needs to be heard. And also, we need a place to be able to talk about these issues among ourselves. So our topics today are an article where Carol Gill responds to disabled supporters of assisted suicide, and also an update on an item we brought you last week, a person in Montreal who is in the process of starving himself to death. So starting with Carol Gill responding to disabled supporters of assisted suicide. In the year 2000, Dr. Carol Gill of the University of Chicago responded to an article by Andrew Batavia of assisted suicide. Dr. Gill into the practice and about people with disabilities in the U.S. medical system. We're going to look back at this article because even though it's 15 years old, her comments are still very important 15 years later. First of all, she talks about that people with disabilities, like non-disabled people, are able to commit suicide if they really want to. And she says people with disabilities are, even with severe disabilities, are more resourceful than most people think they are. And that's very true.
Yes, we saw it many times.
Decision in Carter, they base their decision on this idea that people with disabilities aren't able to kill themselves.
Which is not true.
Right, it's not true. And also people have the option to let themselves die with palliative care so that they won't suffer. And it's a choice of suicide, and it's not necessarily the best choice, but suicide
is never the best choice, right. But people have the right to commit it in a certain way.
Right, exactly. And one thing that, another thing that Dr. Gill points out is that suicide persons with and without disabilities. And she says, in his article, Andrew Batavia talks about his friend's suicide, which which were not easy, painless, or certain. What he doesn't say is that this is true for suicide for non-disabled people.
Any suicide.
It's true. It's not predictable what's going to happen, and it's not supposed to be easy.
No,
That's kind of
dying
yeah.
is not. It's not fun at all.
Right. It's not supposed to be fun either. It's certainly tragic that Mr. Batavia lost 3 friends to suicide, but it's not unusual that at least one of them had made 2 attempts before completing the act. Most suicide attempts do not end in death, and a completed suicide is commonly preceded by several attempts.
Yeah, the successful of suicide are a little bit higher in men than in women.
Right.
But normally there's many attempts before a success.
Right, and part of our point about this is that when somebody attempts suicide, they're making a cry for help. But if somebody's desire to commit suicide becomes the reality of their suicide because it's guaranteed, because somebody helps them commit suicide, then they've lost the option to attempt suicide and make that cry for help.
Yeah.
And so they've lost also the safety net that's there for people who are in that state where they have suicide prevention services.
Yep.
Those are both very important things to keep in mind. Long-standing laws against helping people commit suicide reflect society's view that ending one's life is so grave a matter that it should be lonely and difficult endeavor, free from external influence or facilitation, and open to failure. In other words, suicide is not supposed to be easy for anyone, disabled or not. But people like the people in the Supreme Court have decided it should be easy for people with disabilities, based on their idea of what life with a disability is like.
Yeah.
So.
It was supposed because people who have degrading malady, sickness, a degrading sickness. If they suicide when they could, they lose few days or few months of real life, because if they doesn't suicide now, they will not be able in the future, which is not true. Even the people with a quad could suicide just by asking palliative care and stop to drink and stop to eat. That's a way, but that's not the way that we want.
Right.
But that's a way that even people with a quad could do easily.
Yeah. And the way I think of it is that most people with disabilities who have, some mobility or are able to commit, so sick that you're not suicide, you're probably having some medical treatment that if it were stopped, you would die fairly soon.
Fairly soon, yeah.
So that's kind of what we think about. Let's see. Oops. Although supporters criticize government intrusion into private affairs, advocates of assisted suicide new laws single out persons with infants for a guaranteed bureaucratically facilitated death on request. Yeah, they don't explain why people with illnesses and disabilities should receive this option, but non-disabled adults, however autonomous and well-informed, are denied the same option when they find life unendurable. So that's, another discrimination question. How come people with disabilities get it and non-disabled people don't?
This is discriminatory.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
Right. And it's just very frustrating when you hear some of the people who push assisted suicide say that it's discriminatory in the other way because people are losing a few months of life. I often think of it as, someone loses a few months of life, but somebody could lose their entire life.
Yeah. Which one is more important?
Right, exactly. The insistence by Right to Die supporters that physical loss justifies what they call rational suicide leads to some logical contradictions. For example, Batavia says people with disabilities are, quote, fully capable of autonomy, unquote, and, quote, do not wish to be protected from themselves. Yet he feels justified in denying requests from disabled people when he decides they need protection. He argues that if they are not helped to die, they will attempt to take their own lives, sometimes with disastrous results, such as a coma, brain damage, or further physical suffering. These are the same consequences faced by non-disabled people.
Exactly the same.
Right, exactly.
Okay? If you try to shoot yourself and the bullet just bounces over your head, you will suffer for a very long time of very painful headache.
Right.
Be sure of that.
Right, right. So he's saying that people with disabilities should be protected from that, but non-disabled people not. And again, it's different.
Discriminatory again.
Right. Batavia refuses to believe that oppression can affect the freedom of people with disabilities to make truly free choices. In the face of well-known links between disability and poverty, social devaluation, exclusion, and medical abuse, he dismisses oppression as a source of coercion and despair in requests for assisted suicide. That seems a little bizarre to me.
It is.
But it's something that the lawyer for the plaintiffs in the Carter case said as well. He said people aren't so weak that they would be influenced by these things, but gee, you know, it sort of discounts the entire notion that oppression is something that affects people negatively, which is something that sociological studies have been proving for 150 years.
Or more.
Or more, yeah. Yet this was the experience of oppression was that of many individuals with disabilities who have asked for help to die. Some have died to escape an institution. Carol Gill of Larry McAfee, who won the right to be allowed to process. He was contacted by a local independent living center and was helped to move out of the nursing home into his own apartment and to get personal care attendance. And Carol Gill says, McAfee lived long enough to denounce the social policies that he believed had pressured him to give up on life. So he had asked to die because he was stuck in an institution. Once he got out, he wanted to live, and realized that it wasn't his disability that was the problem, it was the social oppression.
When you have the control over your life and their life is reasonably good, you doesn't have any reason to die. But it's the opposite when you feel that you're in prison.
Right. And if assisted suicide had been legal and routine in the 1980s, it's possible that he wouldn't have survived long enough to understand and voice the real cause of his despair. He was, after all, a rational adult who was thoroughly informed by his doctor of his prognosis and his options. His desire to die was clear and persistent over time, and these are all what's required for assisted suicide. He was a perfect candidate for assisted suicide. However, he would have died unnecessarily. And this is what we're afraid of.
We are very afraid of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a very realistic scenario. Real autonomy requires not just the ability to make competent choices, but also real options. So you have the ability, you're competent, but you also need to have choices. Many people with disabilities have few real options to live as they wish, and no assisted suicide guidelines guarantee those options. So they talk about an informed choice. The doctor has to inform you about palliative care, inform you about your diagnosis, inform. But there's nothing that says the doctor has to make sure you get palliative care.
Yeah.
Or that you get home care or whatever.
So this is a real trouble because you could be informed as many times as needed and you still not have choice.
Right. Doctor says, well, there's palliative care, and you say, I'd like that, please. And doctor, well, we can't get that to you.
Yeah. Basically, what's happening right now. It's not so clear like that, but they will phone to a home who give palliative care, and they will answer, we are already full, but in 2 or 3 days we will be able to get a bed.
Or in 2 or 3 months.
Or in 2 or 3 months, but you are dying.
Right, exactly. Also, Batavia confuses assisted suicide with the right to refuse treatment when he says, people who are in the process of dying and who are suffering intolerably according to their own assessment should not be required by the state to continue to live and suffer if that is not their desire. Nobody's saying that. And that's something that people who support assisted suicide often say, you're just wanting us to suffer. You people, you don't know, you're horrible people making us want to suffer. You know, it's not
true.
What we're
you
doing.
have already the right, if it's not even a right, but you have the possibility, let's say, to kill yourself.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And that's why groups like Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, we don't just talk about assisted suicide, we talk about pushing for home-based services, for palliative care, for accessibility in the community, for things that people need to live.
All things related.
In the community. Yeah. So
to be in control of your life.
Right.
Whatever you feel, if you are handicapped or not.
Right. And one thing Carol Gill points out is that there's a difference between expecting somebody to act on their own if they want to kill themselves, and it's not the same as forcing a dying person to go on living. And we understand that, and it's not what we're doing. She also responds to Batavia's inaccurate description of opponents' our arguments about discrimination. And she says that we use the term discrimination when the death wishes of disabled persons are respected, whereas the death wishes of non-disabled people are treated as cries for help. So that's what we call discrimination.
Again, yeah.
Right. And also opponents do it. One of the things Batavia says is that we who oppose assisted suicide don't care about people who have who are dying with palliative care or who have the right to die, that we haven't voiced any objection to that, and that's not true. We have fought this issue for 30 years, and the first battles that we fought were for Elizabeth Bouvia, who wanted the right to let herself starve to death. And people with disabilities said that the idea to let herself starve to death is discriminatory because a non-disabled person wouldn't be allowed that. So, you know, that he makes all kinds of accusations that are not held up. Most health professionals also don't know so little about living with disabilities that they are unable to provide sufficient information for informed consent. And this came from an article that talks all about the biases and prejudice of health professionals, so it sort of reinforces the text of the rest of the article. Batavia talks about a poll showing support for assisted suicide among disabled people, but the truth is that there has been very, very little research on the point of view of people with disabilities.
Very true, yeah.
And we've, you know, the group Dying with Dignity came out late last year with a poll that says 85% of people with disabilities support assisted suicide. Well, they had a total survey sample of 2,100 people, and only 95 of those claimed to have disability.
So they asked to non-disabled people what they think about the subject, but only 94. So the proportion was very, 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 very small.
It's a small proportion, and they're, trying to take
less than 5%.
Also, oftentimes these surveys, the way the questions are posed, they're confusing to people because they'll say aid in dying or something like that, and a lot of people think that is
confusing because aid of dying, most people think it's the palliative care.
Right, exactly.
If you talk about euthanasia or be killed, it's not exactly the same answer.
Right, exactly. So this article was written in the year 2000. So when Carol Gill undertook a study in 2005, she assembled a group of 29 people with various disabilities. She was very careful about gathering people who, a balanced group of people, so recommendations from people who were pro and anti-assisted suicide. It was a very balanced group. The questions were very carefully done to be balanced.
Yeah.
And she
kind of neutral question or
right.
Real question.
Right. She asked a series of questions before and after the people saw presentations for and against assisted suicide. And the presentations, each group had two presenters, one disabled and the other non-disabled. Actually, I think both were disabled. Anyway, it was a very balanced presentation. So on the question, should assisted suicide be legalized for people with terminal illness? Before the presentation, 52% said yes, 38% said no, and 10% were neutral or didn't know.
So it's far from the 85%.
Right, exactly.
First.
Right. After the presentation, the yes people stayed at 52, but now 45% said no, and only 3% were neutral or didn't know.
So everybody who was neutral and more informed, because it was both side balance, vote for no.
Right.
So informed people clearly, and we saw exactly where it's go.
Right.
It's clear.
Right. The people who became informed opposed assisted suicide.
Yeah.
And on the question, should assisted suicide be legalized for people with disabilities? Before the presentation, 28% said yes, 55% said no, and 17% were neutral or didn't know. But after the presentation, 31% said yes, but 62% said no, and 7% were still neutral.
So the same progression for the no side.
Right.
Okay, so it's clear, inform people clearly, and the decision is clear.
Right, exactly. And like we said before, these figures are far from the 85% support among people with disabilities claimed by supporters.
Very, very far.
But the important thing is that people need to know what they're learning, what they're voting for in a survey, what they're saying their opinion. And when people understand this issue, they oppose it. And this is what happens in the United States when a bill comes up in legislature. There's an education effort, and then the legislature almost always rejects it. And in fact, that's happened more than 140 times in the US, that bills have come before legislatures and been rejected. And it's only been accepted 3 times. So that's a pretty good score.
Yes, it is.
So we also have an update on the matter that we brought last week about a fellow who is in Montreal. He's in the process of starving himself to death. And just wanted to let you know that there were 2 articles that appeared in the Journal de Montréal this week about his situation. And you can talk a little bit about that.
I meet him three times, first with Amy, and we get an interview, a very nice one. the interview itself was going very well, and the guy is clear and very, let's say, it's a sympathetic guy. And I meet him twice after that. He's slowly
becoming weak.
Yeah, becoming weak, but the morale is great, and his decision is very, very powerful. But at the same time, he said to us in the interview that if he was sure to get real good care and no poverty, okay, and be sure that he could control his life, the situation will not be the same. He will want to live.
Right.
So it's clear. He know exactly, because he was working in plus or minus the same area, okay? He know what happened in the CSHSLD and
in nursing homes.
Nursing home. He know what happened, really. He know what abuse are doing in those homes. Not everybody, there is good one, but there is bad one too, and there's quite a lot of impression to be in prison when you are in those homes, because you have to take the bath at this hour, they change your diaper at this hour, not when you leave, when they feel that they could do, okay? You have to go to bed at this hour, to wake up at this hour, and you doesn't have choice. That is the same effect as in the prison and the same rules. You can see the only difference that they give you the key of your cell, but you are in prison.
Right. So one of the articles focused on the lack of suicide prevention and the impact of inadequate community supports on his decision to let himself die. So those two articles were really, really good in that sense. And I would say that this is the first time that these issues have been clearly described in a French language publication in Quebec. I think so.
It was clear. The second one was very, very good. This is probably the first good article in the mainstream paper that we could rely on and really describe what's really happened.
Right.
And those are kind of articles should have appeared many times since 2 years. But this is the first, and it's too late. The decision are already taken. The law 52 are a vote in Quebec, and the decision of the Supreme Court is given. Yes, right. So it's too late. But it's never too late to fight.
Right, exactly. And one of the good things that came out of this was that the director of the Quebec Association for Suicide Prevention said that people with disabilities should have access to suicide prevention, which when we were at the hearings for Bill 52, that group came out in favor of the law. So we kind of felt that was awful.
The group to prevention of suicide was in favor of suicide.
Right. It was really bizarre.
Okay, yeah, that's the less that we could say.
Yeah, so it is very, very sad that this fellow is going to die because he's a great advocate. And
he's a very nice.
And he's a really nice person.
Yeah.
And it's very sad. And we are very appreciative that he has let us participate in telling his story. And we thank him. Yeah. And all because of him, and it's sad because it takes the death of one people to get some article like that. Somebody sacrificed himself to get those articles. Very sad, but it will give a very, very powerful tools to demonstrate that what we said since a lot of months, 2 years now, right, that what we said was the truth. Right, exactly. So, okay, well, that's pretty much all we have for today. I think so. So I'm going to, I want to let you know how to reach us in case you heard something interesting. To email me, you can email info@tv-ndy.org. .ca, excuse me, .ca. You can follow me on Twitter at TVNDY, so @TVNDY. You can go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet, or you can go to our website at tvndy.ca. Thank you. You can go on YouTube and look at our old broadcasts, and that just go to YouTube and do a search on disability and euthanasia, and you'll find them. And there are also some other videos on the subject on my YouTube channel. And I hope you will join us again. I want to thank Christian for helping out.
Thank you.
And thank you for being there.
See you next Friday.
Yep. See you next Friday. Have a good week.
Take care.